If you've ever been hiking in Utah, you know there are a lot of really dry locations that are often beautiful to walk through and tend to have caves and crevices that act almost as pathways between the upper levels of the ground. Now, most experienced explorers or hikers will tell you that you shouldn't really go walking the crevices in case there is a flash flood. If it rains while you are down there, it can become very dangerous very quickly. Well, back in 2012, I wanted to go for a hike, so I messaged my friend Jacob, who likes to go on nature walks with me. I asked him if he wanted to meet me at this new spot I had heard about from a family member of mine. He was excited. It had been a while since we had walked a trail that we were somewhat unfamiliar with, so he eagerly agreed, and we ended up meeting at the hiking spot. We parked at the head of the trail and immediately were pleased. There wasn't much foliage around, so it was basically a wide open trail that let you look on for what seemed like miles. The mountains in the distance were absolutely stunning. We couldn't wait for too long. We both were too excited, so Jacob and I quickly began to walk down the trail, on which we noticed some signs that warned about cracks in the ground and to stay away from them. But we had lived out here for most of our lives, so it wasn't anything new to us. We continued down the trail, taking in the sights, loving every second of it. Then we came across a crevice in the ground that looked like it was about a 14-foot drop. We knew we weren't going to go in, but we both needed a break, so we decided to just sit on the edge of it and relax. We had done this countless times, and never did it seem unsafe. However, when Jacob lowered himself to a sitting position on the edge, the piece of the land that was supporting his hand crumbled out from underneath him, and he tumbled down into the 14-foot crack in the ground. I knew he had taken a hard hit because I was able to hear the impact echo upward out of the crevice. Jacob groaned in pain, and I asked him if he was okay. He was clearly conscious, but he couldn't get himself to stand, so he needed help to get out of the hole. I quickly began looking around for some sort of stick or branch to help him out, but as I said, there were hardly any trees or foliage. There was nothing. I checked my cell phone, and as I expected, there was no bars. I was in such a panic. I hadn't even realized how cloudy it had gotten. And just then, I heard the sound of thunder. I rushed back to the crack and called for Jacob. He looked up at me with tears running down his face, and before he could say anything, I heard the sound of water. I began to panic. I couldn't even begin to imagine the horrible thoughts going through Jacob's head. Before I could even move, it was like a tidal wave came rushing through the crevice. Jacob was gone. I couldn't see him at all. I didn't know what to do. The only thing I could think of was try to run and get service to call someone, but by the time anyone could get there, it was far too late. Jacob's body wasn't found until 4 days after the storm. He had been pulled deeper down the crevice, where he ended up being wedged between two giant rocks. If there is one thing I will never forget from that day, it was the look that was on Jacob's face before being swept away. A few summers ago, I was walking around the trails that were a couple of miles from my house in Oregon. I loved hiking the area. The beauty of nature out there is truly something else. I used to walk the same trail almost every week, pretty much as often as I could. I had a particular spot that I liked to walk to, rest at, and then head back. It was about a 1.5-mile hike one way, so 3 miles total. With a rest in the middle, it was great. So I was on the trail, and something was weird that day. It was really quiet, which isn't too unusual. Not many people walk the trail on a daily basis, but usually you can hear birds and other animals every now and then. But for some reason, it was almost dead silent. At first, it didn't bother me. I just kept on walking. I figured maybe it meant a storm was coming or something. It wasn't until about a mile into my hike that I began to feel as if I was being watched. Chills went up my spine. I don't know what it was, but it felt like something was staring daggers at me. But I tried to brush it off. I figured I was close to the rest spot and then I would head home. No problem. So I kept walking, and eventually I did make it to the resting spot. But still, I couldn't help but feel like something was watching me. And at that moment, I realized that I had to walk back the way I came, meaning I would most likely have to face whatever had been following me if something was actually there. At first, I couldn't move. I didn't know what to do, but as I realized that the sun was going to be setting soon, I knew I had to go. It was now or never, so I mustered up the courage to begin walking back to my car. And as I made my way, the feeling of eyes on me only grew more and more intense. I made it about a quarter of a mile away from the entry of the trail and noticed that now it was almost completely dark. I mean, the sky was still lit up by the setting sun, but looking into the woods, it was very dim. I couldn't help but look around me and over my shoulder, and that was when I saw them. Two big, round, glowing eyes peering down at me from a branch in the distance. I was stricken with fear. The eyes didn't move. They didn't blink. They just stared for a moment, and then they were gone, as if they vanished into thin air. But I could swear I heard the scratching sound of tree bark. So I did the only thing that I could think of. I ran as fast as I could to my car. I could hear whatever was following me behind me slowly getting closer and closer. Luckily, I made it to my car and managed to hop inside before anything could happen. But when I turned on the headlights, in the tree line, I could see what had been stalking me. It was a full-grown mountain lion, but this one was clearly pretty thin. I would almost say that it was emaciated, but I'm no expert. I knew that it had only been stalking me due to the lack of food. So I ended up calling the Park Service and letting them know about the experience and the mountain lion. Hopefully, they were able to figure out some way to help it so it could eat and not have to scare the crap out of hikers like me. People ask me why I have a hard time trusting people. Whenever that happens, I just tell them this story. I had just moved into a new town and started school in the back half of the year. At first, no one really talked to me, but then out of the blue, someone decided to sit with me at lunch. It was this kid Tim, who seemed pretty popular from how I saw it. He was always joking around in the few classes I had with him with a bunch of friends, so I thought it was pretty cool that he chose to hang with me. I felt like we quickly hit it off, and we were going to be pretty good friends. We had a lot of the same taste in music, and we played the same games on the same consoles. This was before crossplay was even considered, so that was important at the time. It was awesome. We exchanged numbers and agreed to kick it sometime. To my surprise, a few days later, he hit me up and asked me if I smoked, and at the time, I had already tried it a few times and enjoyed it every now and then. Then he asked me if I wanted to meet up that night, right after 10. We would go for a walk and smoke a bit. At first, I was reluctant, but he was my only friend at the time, and I didn't want to let him down. Plus, it was the weekend, so I figured, why not? I told him I would meet up with him, and just to send me the location. Luckily, it was only about a 7-minute walk from my house. The two of us met up at 10. He pulled out what we were going to smoke out of his pocket and began to walk into the woods. We had walked for about 10 minutes, and by then we had finished what Tim had brought. He said that he had to go relieve himself real quick, so I just walked a bit away from him, pulled out my phone to check the time and stuff. All of a sudden, I heard the sound of quiet chuckling, and then I felt something sharp. I jumped forward from the shock and felt my right side near my back. It was wet, but I couldn't tell what from. That was when I felt it again on my other side. This time, I knew what it was though. Tim had come back from whatever he was doing, only this time he had a knife on him. As soon as I realized that I had just been stabbed twice, my instincts kicked in and I began to sprint in the other direction. I was a cross-country runner in my last school, so I knew I could outrun him. What I didn't know was how hard it would be to breathe properly with 2 holes in your back. I had my phone still in my hand, so I pulled up the phone and dialed 911 for help. As soon as I began talking on the phone, I heard the footsteps that had been pursuing me stop. I didn't risk anything, and I just kept moving. I made it onto the road, and I collapsed. All I could do now was to wait for the police and an ambulance. After waking up in the hospital bed, the nurse informed me that I had a collapsed lung on top of the 2 stab wounds. Everyone was surprised I managed to make it out of the woods. Tim was ultimately arrested and confessed to stabbing me. He claimed it was some sort of an initiation for him into a local gang. I'm fine now, but yeah, I definitely have a hard time trusting new people.